two of you contributed the most to breaking the restriction, so you deserve those two treasures, Immortal Lord Hot Flame said with a smile, and the crimson figure behind him vanished into his body as he spoke. Now that I think about it, that gourd that you summoned earlier was an essential immortal treasures, right? It was certainly extraordinarily powerful. Fox 3 suddenly said as he turned to Han Li, and Shi Chuankong also turned to look at him with an intrigued expression. As for Immortal Lord Hot Flame, he had already seen Han Li use the gourd in battle in the past, so he wasn't all that surprised. That's right. That gourd is an essential immortal treasure that I managed to obtain by chance many years ago, Han Li replied in an ambiguous fashion. There were a couple of reasons for why he had decided to summon the profound heavenly gourd here. Firstly, Immortal Lord Hot Flame was already aware of its existence, so there was no need to hide it. Secondly, he wanted to display some power so that Fox 3 and Shi Chuankong didn't regard him as some golden immortal stage pushover who posed no threat to them. Of course, he had altered the power and aura of the gourd somewhat before summoning it. All essential immortal treasures possess tremendous power, and they're only acquired by those with immense fortune. It looks like you're a very lucky man, fellow Taoist Li. Hopefully, some of your luck can rub off on all of us on this trip, Fox 3 chuckled. Han Li merely smiled and offered no response. As this conversation was taking place, the white mist within the entrance of the sect had begun to churn violently, and it quickly transformed into a massive white vortex with a narrow passageway at its center. Faint rays of light could be seen within the passageway, presenting a rather mysterious sight to behold. It's already taken us quite some time to break that restriction, so let's not waste any more time here, Fox 3 said as he flew into the passageway as a streak of silver light, followed immediately by Immortal Lord Hot Flame. Han Li was just about to follow along as well when he suddenly noticed that Shi Chuankong didn't seem to be displaying any intention of moving from the spot. And he asked, "Are you not coming in, Brother Shi? All of the treasures inside could be taken if you're too slow. Go on ahead, Brother Li. I'll come in right after I've packed up this array. This array is a closely guarded secret of our devil race, so I can't afford to just leave it here." Shi Chuankong replied with a smile as he swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a burst of purple light that began quickly picking up the array tools on the ground. All right. In that case, I'll be going on ahead as well, Han Li said with a nod before flying into the passageway as a streak of azure light. A peculiar gleam flashed through Shi Chuankong's eyes as he watched Han Li enter the passageway, and, after packing up the silver array on the ground, he quickly followed suit. However, in the instant that he flew into the passageway, a small purple ball sprang out of his body before hovering in midair. The ball was around the size of a walnut, and there were countless tiny silver runes etched onto its surface, giving off bursts of spatial fluctuations. The purple ball shuddered momentarily before exploding to form a dense purple devilish cloud with countless silver runes flashing within it. The purple devilish cloud was swirling and twisting like a living creature as it burrowed into space, but the silver runes within it were left behind to form a silver array that was several dozen feet in size. The space at the center of the array shuddered violently before a rift opened up, then split apart even further to create a dark purple spatial passageway. However, the spatial passageway seemed to be extremely unstable, and looked as if it could collapse at any moment. 3 figures shot out of the spatial passageway before landing in front of the entrance of the sect. All 3 of them were purple-robed devilish beings that were giving off tremendous devilish chi. The trio was led by a thin elderly man with a dark complexion and a head of sparse hair. His eyes were sunken extremely deep into his face, and he resembled a skeleton wearing a skin suit, presenting a harrowing sight to behold. Furthermore, there was no flesh or blood on his arms whatsoever, and the black arm bones beneath were revealed with a series of worm-like purple runes engraved upon them, giving off formidable devilish chi fluctuations. Standing beside him was a tall and extremely handsome purple-haired young man with a head of purple hair so long that it could trail all the way down onto the ground. At the moment, His hair was arranged into a tall bun that was bouncing along behind him, and beneath his purple robe was another red feather robe that seemed to have been woven out of the feathers of some type of spirit bird. The red robe was extremely vibrant, and to complete his extravagant outfit, he was wearing a pair of rainbow-colored boots that were riddled with gemstones. His overall appearance resembled that of a fancy rooster. Standing beside him was a purple-robed young woman with a head of luscious hair and an exceptional figure, but her facial features were concealed behind a white veil. After the three of them flew out of the spatial passageway, it was finally unable to hold itself together any longer, and it quickly collapsed before vanishing altogether. The fact that the spatial passageway collapsed so quickly indicates that where we are right now is extremely far away from the Black Soil Immortal region. It's no wonder that we haven't been able to ascertain the location of these ruins prior to this. If it weren't for the young master guiding us, we could have searched for 10,000 more years without any luck, the elderly man remarked, then turned his gaze toward the white vortex. That's the entrance. It looks like the young master and his companions have already broken the restriction. Let's go in, the purple-haired young man said. However, the elderly man raised an arm to stop him, and several threads of purple light shot out of his fingertips. Hold on. The young master told us to wait for a few minutes after we arrive before we enter the ruins. The young man's expression changed slightly at the sight of the threads of purple light, and a sheepish smile appeared on his face as he said, "My mistake. Let's wait for a bit before we go in." The elderly man gave a cold harumph before lowering his arm. As soon as Han Li flew into the vortex passageway, his body was instantly swept up by a burst of tremendous power, following which he found himself in a vast expanse of violent white currents. The currents of white light were surging in a completely haphazard and chaotic fashion, crashing against one another to produce a deafening noise. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this. These white currents were somewhat similar to the spatial turbulence that he had to endure during his ascension to the true immortal realm from the spirit domain realm. However, these currents were far more powerful and interspersed with hints of time law powers. Even though Han Li had grown countless times more powerful since the time he first arrived in the true immortal realm, he was still unable to steady himself, and he was involuntarily pulled along by the white currents. Bursts of tremendous power were constantly tearing at his body from all directions, and in response, he conjured up his true extreme film to form a protective layer over himself. After that, he took a moment to inspect his surroundings, but all he could see were more chaotic white currents, while Fox 3, Immortal Lord Hot Flame, and Shi Chuangkong were nowhere to be found. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he was just about to do something when a giant ball of white light suddenly appeared up ahead before sweeping up his entire body. The ball of white light was filled with a burst of extremely chaotic time law powers, and Han Li was forced to close his eyes in the face of the blinding white light. In the next instant, he was abruptly pulled downward by a burst of tremendous force. A resounding thump rang out as he crashed into something, and all of the spatial turbulence around him instantly vanished. Upon opening his eyes, he was ecstatic to discover that he had emerged from the white currents, and he had slammed into the ground, creating a massive crater with his fall. He flew out of the crater before rising up into the air and inspecting his surroundings, upon which he discovered that he was situated on a flat and barren plain that was almost completely devoid of vegetation. There was white mist all around him, and the sky was also a murky white color. Due to the presence of this white mist, he wasn't able to see very far, but as soon as he released his spiritual sense to try and get a better grasp on his surroundings, he discovered that there was a burst of peculiar spatial power in the surrounding area that severely restricted his spiritual sense. Even with his current spiritual sense, he was only able to spread it over an area with a radius of 3,000 to 4,000 feet. Hence, he decided to turn to his infernal devilish eyes instead, and that allowed him to see a little further, but visibility was still restricted to only around 10,000 feet. The surrounding white mist was no ordinary mist, and it posed much impediment to his infernal devilish eyes. Despite the strange nature of the surrounding environment, Han Li remained calm and collected. He had explored countless ruins and secret areas, and he had encountered more than his fair share of strange places during those adventures. After descending back down onto the ground, he swept a sleeve through the air to summon a palm-sized purple jade plate with a complex silver array engraved upon it. This was a teleportation array plate that Shi Chuangkong had given him before they entered the illusory smoke swamp, and it had been refined using a secret technique unique to the devil race. The array plate was imbued with a hint of spatial power, allowing communication to take place even through spatial barriers, so it was far more useful in secret areas like this one than normal communication array plates. The array plate rose up into the air at Han Li's behest, and it released a purple halo that was constantly flashing and fluctuating in brightness. A long time passed, but no response came from the array plate. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he waited for a while longer before stowing the array plate away. For some reason, he was unable to establish communication with Fox 3 and the others using the array plate. If he couldn't find Fox 3, then there would be no way for him to complete this Reincarnation Palace mission. So this was a rather awkward predicament. At this point, he still didn't even know what the mission entailed. He had raised the question to Fox 3 on multiple occasions in the past, but all Fox 3 had told him was that he would answer that question once they arrived at their destination. However, now that they had arrived, they were no longer in the same place.